All right, welcome into this episode of Farz Cast. Farzin Vousoughian here with you. Hope you guys are having a good week. Hope you guys are staying safe. Normalcy is pretty much coming back for the most part. I know I feel like I open up every show just kind of talking about that, but it seems like we're really doing well with all of that right now. Hey, real quick note, just some housekeeping notes for this week. I was really excited to have Dan Shonka on. Dan used to be a scout for the Chiefs and for the Kansas Jayhawks. He also scouted for Andy Reid in Philadelphia. So if you want to talk to him about football, especially some Chiefs football, he's a perfect guy to talk to. Unfortunately, he had to cancel tomorrow because of something out of his control. So I am going to have someone else come in instead. Jared McMullen of Friday Night Cranks. He will be joining me tomorrow. I'm really excited to talk to Jared. Really nice guy. Super good guy. YouTuber, entertainer, all that good stuff. Director, producer. He does a lot of things. So he'll join me tomorrow on the podcast. So my Facebook page, I think you guys already know, I'm able to post again, but I can't do live videos. But I did find a way around it. I am doing live videos from my personal page, and it is now being shared to my public page. So I found one way around it somehow, but we're going to go with it anyway. I'm really excited for this podcast. This guy's been on the podcast with me before. Really nice guy. Does a lot in the Chiefs community still today, doing a Chiefs podcast over at the Believe Podcast Networks. In fact, Jason Brown from Last Chance U, he'll be joining me. He's also from the Believe Podcast Networks. Former Kansas City Chief, best known for his 4 touchdown grabs. Joe Valerio joins me on the podcast. Joe, welcome back, man. Good to see you. How are you?
Farzin, great to see you. Great to be back and sharing some thoughts and going ons with your audience. And yeah, it's great to see you, man. Love the night sweater and excited about the hockey playoffs, excited about basketball. Hey, I'm excited about the normalcy that you talked about. I actually spent my first day back in an office today. Since I've retired from football, I've been I joined the insurance brokerage industry 20 plus years ago after I retired, and I actually, technically work out of New York, even though I live in the Philadelphia area. And I was up in our New York office today and just got back a little while ago. It was the first time I've been in an office since March 12th of 2020. So it was kind of nice. And New York's definitely opening up. Today was the first day of pretty much no restrictions in the city. And so, got a chance to see what was going on in the city. People still all doing the responsible things, people taking care of each other, which is really good and refreshing to see. Our office was not even at close to capacity. Very few people were in there, but I had to go up for some meetings. But it was good to see. Good to be back up in the Big Apple and getting back to some, like you said, normalcy.
I'm not an expert on all this stuff. I'm not going to pretend to be, but you know what I feel like this pandemic, I feel like we could have returned to normalcy sooner if all these like 2-week stay-at-home orders, remember all of that when that started? It was so weird because every state started at a different time. I'm like, this is not going to work. Everyone's starting to close at different times. Everyone's opening up at different times. It's just not going to work the way the scientists wanted it to. And I don't think that's science talk. I think that's just logic right there. But look, one way or another, we're here.
We're here. We're a mobile society. So we kind of had to have a coordinated effort, right? Because we're mobile.
Yeah.
The world has gotten so small, right? From between travel and the way that businesses conduct themselves, and the world is a much smaller place than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, where we needed to be more coordinated. But we're here, we are where we are, we've gotten through it. People are doing the right thing. So I'm just happy to see that. I'm happy to see that, knock on wood, maybe we're turning a corner.
Yeah, hopefully. By the way, I know I keep getting in trouble with Facebook. Can you see the TV right there?
I can. I think did I see Bill Nye the Science Guy at some point on there? I was like,
I'm gonna have to look. I don't want to get into any more trouble with Facebook than I already am. So I'm just gonna do that.
Yeah, make sure you're careful what channel you have on there, Farzin.
I talked to you about this. I shared a video of a tennis player giving a racket to a boy. and everyone was sharing it online. It was like one of the coolest videos ever. And look, it's not Facebook's deal. I know the people who own the content, they're the ones who lost their shit over it, but what are you going to do? Look, we're finding a way to broadcast this live one way or another. So
We
I'm
are.
sure
You're doing it, Farzin. You're doing it.
I'm sure I'll get some creepy friend requests after this, but that's okay. My friend request on Facebook is full. Are you on Facebook, by the way?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you were. Why are we not friends on there? What the hell, Joe?
I don't know. I have to be honest. Facebook is probably the social media that I go on the least.
Dude, good for you. That's probably a good thing.
It's probably the one that I just go on the least. I'm spending a lot of time on Twitter, promoting the show. I just started getting into Instagram. I'm old. I got a lot of gray hair, but it's enough for me. It's enough for me to be out there trying to be as active as I can on Twitter. I need to probably do a little bit more in that space, but between what goes on at work and just trying to balance things in my life, I find myself just wanting to shut down. I spend so much time, especially during the pandemic. I've spent so much time online. We use Microsoft Teams at work, but that whole Zoom fatigue is starting to set in. So
Yeah.
once I shut down my computer at night after work, I kind of try to just, short of watching television screens, I try to get the screen time down.
You know what's funny? You mentioned Zoom and all. I love Zoom. It's really awesome the way you can record and broadcast live, all this stuff. So when you were on the first time you and I ever did a podcast together, it was back when I was doing the Chiefs Zone still, which is obviously retired and all that. But so Zach and DJ joined me as co-hosts in the final season I did the podcast, which was the year we won the Super Bowl. And I remember what we would do. We have a program called Audacity. We each record our own audio, and then they send it to me. And we would all say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I would have to sync that all up, which was really tedious and all. When we had you, for whatever reason, the recording system was not working. So I called you on my phone and I put you on speaker and I would just point it up to the speaker like this. I'm like, and by the way, Zach, DJ, and I, we were also on the phone talking to each other while we did this because there was no other way. I mean, if there's anything good that I learned in this pandemic, it's definitely Zoom. Definitely. Features you can use on this. So I wish I knew about Zoom a lot sooner. I would have had a lot more guests in a lot more convenient ways.
Yeah, Jeff Fedotin and I, he's our partner on the Believe in Chiefs podcast. We did that with Carl Peterson. We had Carl on, and it was fantastic. I mean, the stories, he's just right. I mean, he was Mr. Kansas City, the rebirth of the Chiefs and everything that he did to bring the Chiefs organization to that next level, right, during the late 80s, obviously, and into the 90s with Joe Montana and the Marcus Allen signings and everything. But he had some technical difficulties. So here's what I did, Farzin. So Carl was on his cell phone and it was really low. And I couldn't get my phone to be loud enough because either he didn't turn, like, not to his, a microphone on your phone, but whatever it was, he must have been talking with it away or on the speaker. So I happened to have a red Solo cup next to my desk here where I have my computer, and I grabbed it and I stuck my phone inside the red Solo cup and then put it up next to my Yeti, like you. I have a Yeti microphone. I put it up, and I was letting it echo through the Solo cup. And Jeff was like, "Oh my God, were you like a physics major or something in college? Like, how did you figure out the audio behind that?" I'm like, "I don't know. I just panicked and I grabbed the Solo cup and I stuck it in." So I've got my bad recording stories too.
Oh man, I've had plenty. I've had situations where the audio cuts off, so I have to abruptly come up with something when I'm re-recording the podcast in the past. All very good times, of course. You mentioned you and I, we were talking before we started recording and everything. You talked about your time in Kansas City. We were talking about your dad, who was a pro boxer, and I do want to talk about that later. But you mentioned Joe Montana. I'm really curious because you were drafted by the team in 1991, and you got to keep in mind, I think when Montana came here, we had just moved to the United States. So this sport was something we had no idea about. We didn't know who Joe Montana was. Uh, can you describe to me what the feeling was like, what the reactions were like when you, your teammates, the city all found out that Joe Montana was coming to Kansas City?
Oh, absolutely, Farzin. It was, look, let me, I'll backtrack up a little bit. So 91, I get drafted by the Chiefs. They're coming off
Yeah.
a playoff year, right? It's the new era. It's the Marty era, right? It's the Carl and Marty era. And so they go to the playoffs in 1990, and things are so super exciting, right? I mean, the fact that it had been the first playoff in forever, Steve DeBerg, a name, Christian Okoye, right? Tecmo Bowl superstar. It just, the Chiefs were starting to build at that point, right? And they were becoming a team that people started to think about again. And then we go through the 91 season playoffs, right? We with the rivalry with the Raiders is like reformed and rebuilt. We pick up this rivalry with the Broncos, right? So the Chargers, we played the Chargers in the playoffs in 1992. Like the AFC West was becoming, Seattle was coming into prominence, right, at that point, the Cortez Kennedy era. And it was just an exciting time to be part of the AFC West. Then Joe Montana and Marcus Allen show up, and it just took things to the next level. I mean, it raised the profile of the city, the team, the organization, like beyond, I think, anybody's wildest dreams. I'll tell you a funny story about how that all sort of came to, or at least to make the connection and the correlation between the excitement that the city had. So we used to go to training camp in River Falls, Wisconsin, right? So
Yeah.
we moved training camp from Liberty, Missouri to River Falls my rookie year. That was the first year. And they tried so hard in the town, I should say, of River Falls. It was a town of, I think, if my recollection serves me right, I think it was a town of about 7,000 off college. And then when the students were there, it was like a town of like 9,000, right? It was like 2,000 students at the University of River Falls, Wisconsin, part of the the UW chain of schools, right? 10 schools.
Yeah.
So Division III, mostly known for hockey, typical Division III stadium. And they tried so hard, Farzin, like they had us come in on the 3 fire engines, fire trucks that they had in the whole town. The next movie theater was in Hudson, Wisconsin, which was, a good 20-minute drive. You could go to the Mall of America in Minneapolis, but it was like a 45, 50-minute drive. So, we were out there, and they tried, but like, even with all the hype, I remember going to church one Sunday when we were up there in River Falls, and the priest is finishing up the service, and he says, "Hey, I just want all you Chiefs, welcome, thank you all." But he goes, "This is the part of Mass when we all pray for the Packers." And I was like, "Oh man, we're in your town and we can't get any respect, right?" So we would get like, and even with the parades, there'd be a couple hundred people would come to practice. They would watch us, and you could actually like hear the fans like talking about you. "Oh man, that's 73. He's slow." Or, you could actually hear them. There were so few people watching us at practice. And I was used to growing up going to Eagles practices in Philadelphia. And like, there was thousands of people would go, right, to see the Eagles practice, even when they were bad. And so, we go through 91, 92, still playoffs, the Chiefs are rising, and then Montana and Marcus Allen come. So put it into perspective, we go up to training camp in 1993 for Joe's first year there, first training camp, and Marcus as well. And we're going out on our first day out on the field, doing an acclimation practice, basically helmets, shorts, T-shirts, jerseys, no shoulder pads, no nothing, just nothing but a helmet to go out, stretch, get our sea legs, go through some drills, get used to the practice environment, get used to the grass and everything. And Alex Gibbs was our offensive line coach at the time, right? And he had this great like North Carolina accent, and it's hard for a kid from South Philly to do a Southern accent, but I try. And, Alex he played defensive back at Davidson College, right? So he was all of, 5'6", right? And here he is coaching these, which by the way, will always, in my mind, be one of the best offensive line coaches the NFL's ever seen. And so we're walking out to practice, and we used to dress in the hockey stadium, like the hockey facility. And you really had a blind spot getting to the football field. And we were turning the corner around the hockey facility going out to the field, and you could hear this like this dull. So like we're like, what the heck is going on? So we turn the corner, standing room only, 5,000 plus people packed into this Division III stadium. Stands are full, right? All the track around the track where the field is lined, everybody's standing like 2 deep to watch us in shoulder pads, or not even in shoulder pads, in shorts and helmets, do a walkthrough. So Alex stops us, right? He's whoa, and then, try to do my Southern accent. He's from North Carolina. He goes, boys. He goes, take a look at those stands, and we're all like, oh my God, look at all these people. He goes, I just want to tell you one thing, guys, they ain't here to see you.
I remember you told me that. That's pretty funny.
And he's like, and your jobs, they got a whole lot more important. So let's go have a good practice. And we're all like biting our nails at that point, like, oh my God, like this, and like to me, that just, I know it was a really long story. I mean, it gets so long-winded, but like that summarizes and gives the perspective of how much the organization was risen up at that point because of Marcus Allen and Joe Montana, right? And granted, we had stars, Derek Thomas, Christian Okoye, blah, blah, blah. But it just epitomizes the elevation of the team in 1993.
Well, I mean, nowadays, a lot of these players, when they find out an acquisition about their team, generally they find out through Twitter. How did you find out about Joe Montana going to the Chiefs?
I was actually watching. I was at the stadium, and I was in the weight room with Dave Redmond and Russ Ball, our strength coaches at the time. And we had televisions and stuff. And in the off season, it's not that like it's casual, but it's more casual than during the season. So TVs are on. Guys are working on the treadmill, they're watching TV or whatever. And that's where I learned. I was in the weight room at the Arrowhead complex, down the parking lot from the stadium, and I saw it come on the news. They had flashed a kind of a breaking news that the deal with Joe Montana was about to be struck, and that he was coming to Kansas City. And we're all looking around at each other like, all right, is it April 1st? Like, what's going on here? Like, is this really happening? Like Joe Montana is coming to Kansas City? Like, we were, in 1991 and 1992, it was Barry Word left, Christian Okoye right. Jonathan Hayes was a half a lineman tight end, right? I mean, we had basically 6 linemen if you consider Jonathan, right? He was a blocking tight end, and he had great hands, but he was an extension of our line. We were a smash mouth Marty Ball, Cleveland Browns offensive football team, right? We weren't Joe Montana. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and we were like, well, I guess these mini camps are going to be a lot different than the last ones because we're going to have a playbook to recognize. I mean, we on a dime, we went from running the ball, I don't know, 40 to 50 times a game to the West Coast offense, which was it was great, and it was interesting to watch the way that the team changed over, right? And the kinds of players that we started to bring in that sort of fit that mold. And I think the biggest changes were really up front. I was just very, very lucky that I didn't get caught up in the wash, because if you look back at some of the players that we had or linemen that we had, Rich Baldinger, Dave Lutz, those guys were from the old school, smash mouth, football. And so, luckily I didn't get caught up in that, and I was able to use my athletic ability to stick around for a few more years. And a lot of us had to make that switch to being a more mobile offense, and having to, do a little bit more pass blocking than we were used to.
You did talk about trying to be around for as long as you could with Kansas City. I think your final season was in 95, and then you went to the Rams in 96. From looking at your stat line, it says you only started 4 games. Now you did play a lot. I mean, obviously your 4 receptions, I mean, that's a huge deal. That's a big part of your career. But you didn't start a whole lot. I mean, you spent a lot of your time as a backup. I know, especially younger sports fans, and I think even some older sports fans as well, they still think that every player on the roster lives this glorious life and they all make millions of dollars and all.
I wish.
In fact, we have a family friend who played for the Detroit Lions, and then it was in the 80s, and then he played in the USFL for a few years. But I mean, it's not as easy as it is for someone like you that's trying to make it every year. Can you kind of give us I remember Andy Studebaker, he did an interview on 610, and they actually asked him about this stuff and how they gave him like a car to rent for 2 weeks, and they gave him a hotel for 2 weeks as well. But then after that, he had to figure it out on his own. And look, I remember on Hard Knocks once, someone just signed a lease for an apartment, and a day later they got cut. Can you kind of just give us the behind the scenes of, yeah, sure, you're on the field, you're doing all this stuff, but in your personal life, you're also trying to make sure, you're trying to find some comfort and try to have some job security, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Sure, Farzin. Yeah, look, the numbers today, the problem is that people see the numbers today and they see even what a backup or even what the league minimums might look like.
Yeah.
As an everyday work-a-day player who's just happy to see their name up on the locker tag above their equipment, it's not as glamorous as everybody thinks it is. I mean, the NFL is everybody's heard of this thing called the Pareto's law, right? Which is the 80-20 rule, right? And you can apply it to a lot of different things. And if you look at an NFL roster and anything about the economics of it, 20% of the players make 80% of the money, right? Especially because of the way free agency went. In 1993, when Reggie White sued the NFL and won for unrestricted free agency, it really changed everything, right? It was the implementation of the salary cap because they didn't want football. The owners didn't want to happen what happened to baseball, where the salaries and everything just skyrocketed out of control, and it would put the finances at risk for teams, right? If they couldn't control and have a cap to what they paid their players. But the problem with the cap and what it did is it squished out the middle class, and I call the middle class player, because at that time, especially in the 90s, when they were trying to get an idea of what the cap was going to look like and how you were going to be able to pay your star players and not lose them to free agency, but also field a team that was full of depth, 80-20 rule. Let's just use round numbers, because my wife's a math teacher and I'm terrible at math. So let's say the cap for round numbers, let's say it's $100 million, right? Round numbers, just so we can use good zeros here. There's 20% of your players on that 53-man roster. There's going to be 10 to 15 to maybe, let's call it 20 of those 53 players that are going to make the bulk of that, because you've got to pay them or they're going to go somewhere else, right? It's the Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and all these players that are they're going to be marketable out there.
Yeah.
So what happens is the cap starts to get absorbed, and then all of a sudden you're looking around, you're going, wait a minute, you can't play with just 20 players. Yeah, you can play with 22 starters, but you need backups, you need special teams, you need all these other things. So now we've got to round out our roster with a lot of players. And what are we going to do to pay all those players? Well, when the union put in the league minimums, right, for 1, 2, 3, 4 year players, right, all of a sudden you get to the 4th year and you're at the maximum of the minimum payment, right, that you need to get. And back when I was playing, it was like $275,000 was the minimum you could pay a 4-year veteran. Okay. Well, if you're not an everyday starter and you're not somebody who contributes on a regular basis, what are they going to do? They can't afford, like, if you've only got so much money to spend, they're going to look at the roster and go, well, for 275, I can get 2 rookies at 130,000, which was the rookie league minimum back then. So what are you going to do? You're going to say, well, I've got to pay Joe Montana and Reggie White, and I've got to pay, all these big time players, big money. Well, I'm going to round the roster out with a bunch of rookies or younger players in the 1, 2, or 3 year range. And then once players were hitting that 4 and 5 year range, if you weren't a full-time starter, you were getting squished out.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to a lot of players. And it's not, I'm not doing it like sour grapes, but it just got to the point where if you weren't an everyday starter and they were still feeling their way around this cap thing, it really was, the economics of it were hairy. And it was, I feel like I got, between that and my injury that I had in training camp, everything just happened at the wrong time for me. I was actually getting ready to make a move to tight end in 1995. And I was actually, for all intents and purposes, I was probably going to be the 3rd tight end. And Coach Schottenheimer had even talked to me about changing my number and actually going on to the roster as a tight end. Because in the West Coast offense, you needed a big 3rd tight end, right? Because you wanted your other tight ends to be the Keith Cash types, right? Or the Derek Walker types, who were more receivers than they were blockers. And so we had actually talked about it. And then I went and, torqued up my back in Dallas. We were playing Dallas in Monterrey, Mexico in a preseason game. And that just put me so behind the 8 ball, because I lost all those reps at training camp that I was supposed to get at tight end.
Yeah.
And I was injured. I went from 295, 300 pounds down to about 270, 275 over the course of that time, because I couldn't lift, I couldn't squat, I couldn't exercise, and I lost a lot of weight. And bam, all of a sudden it was like, all right, Joe, what are we going to do with you? And you just get that call. And I, joke with people all the time, it ends for everybody, just some sooner than others. And I was okay with that. But, so it was partially where I was being a 5th year player at that time and what my minimum salary was going to be. The fact that we were still trying to feel our way around the cap. I was hurt. I wasn't a full-time starter, like you alluded to, and it was just a bad recipe for me at that point, and it just didn't work out. And so, look, it happens, and I totally get the business of it. I get the economics of it. But, going back to your original comment, Farzin, yeah, I mean, look, the money was great at the time, right? Don't get me wrong. I mean, to make $275,000 or $300,000 a year back then in the 90s was absolutely fantastic. But, I won't name names to protect the innocent, but, some of our top linemen back then, like, we're talking Pro Bowl type players, their maximum salaries that I remember them, because it was always published, right? It was all public knowledge. Kansas City Star used to publish everybody's salaries every year. I mean, we had perennial all pro type players. The biggest salary we had on the offensive line back then was about $900,000 a year. Think about that. Think about what Joe Thuney signed for.
I was just about to look up Orlando Brown, see what he makes.
Okay. So we're talking, and these players were actually, and I'll keep the names out. I don't want to, name names, but, these players were as good, or if not more proven than a young player like Orlando Brown, taking nothing against him or what he's done. And so when you think about somebody making a superstar all-pro offensive lineman back then making $900,000, right? And then now, what was Thuney's was 80 million?
There's like a specific number. Spotrac has these weird. His base salary is $990,000, but yearly cash altogether is 18.1 million.
Yeah. So it's just the way they play with the numbers. So
yeah.
Think about that. Think about that, and then think about the fact that even that player, right? First of all, Uncle Sam is going to grab half of it, right? at least. Okay, right between state taxes. We used to have to pay taxes in every state that we played in, Farzin. So, you had to pay income tax when we played in Colorado, California. Like I used to file probably, I don't know, 14 tax returns when I was
I did not
playing.
know that. Do players still today have to do that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, it's funny because there was the tax accountant that I used was a guy out of New York, and he was actually part of the. They rewrote some tax regulations, rules, laws, whatever you want to call, about the way that entertainers are taxed. Because the way that it was taxed before they proposed this to the IRS and it passed muster, there was like, let's say, for example, again, I'm Mr. Round Numbers, right? Because I'm terrible at math. So let's say somebody was making $160,000 a year, and they were, there was let's just call it 16 games. Okay, so how they used to tax you is in the state of Colorado. When you played in Colorado on a Sunday, they basically said, well, if you made $160,000 last year and you played 16 games and one of those games was in Colorado, you owe us, you have to pay tax on that 10 grand. Okay, right? So it's 10 grand per game that you're making. And the tax guy that I was working with, and it wasn't just me, he had a whole stable of NFL players. He was like, whoa. It's one day out of 365 that player is earning that money. So then what he did is we would file a tax of 365th of my salary. I would pay tax on to the state of Colorado. So that's how they got around gouging players for. So you just multiply that out for the Joe Montanas of the world at the time who were making $3 million, or the Joe Thuneys who were making $80 million, right, or $18 million a season.
Yeah.
You got to. It was a landmark, right? That they did this. It was a landmark tax change. But so half the salary's gone to Uncle Sam, right? I mean, you're an NFL player. You start trying to keep up with the Joneses a little bit, right? And when you're a young player, and Derek Thomas, who's an established player, or Neil Smith, or Joe Montana, or whomever, pick a name, and they roll up and not that we had guys that were super extravagant, but they come in, they roll up in their brand new Jeeps, they roll up in their brand new pickups and all this stuff. And you're a rookie or a second year player and you're driving around in a car that you had in college. Well, you're like, oh man, I got to go get a car. I can't show up at the stadium in this. And then they go out and buy a new car. There goes cash out the door. Family want to come see you play. You're flying family around. Most of the time, players didn't live in the cities that they played in. So you got, maybe you buy a small home in your hometown, you're renting a townhouse in Kansas City.
Yeah.
Money's just going out the door. And so this, back then at least, these $250,000, $300,000, $400,000 salaries are, at the end of the year, you've got like $100,000 left in the bank. Now, granted, I'm telling you, that's great money. Don't get me wrong, but it's not something you're going to retire on if you only play for 5 or 6 years.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like, people think it's crazy. And then like in my particular case, my wife and I, in my last season with Kansas City, my wife was pregnant, got pregnant with triplets, and I'm looking at, raising 3 kids all at the same time. I'm thinking about 18 years down the road, putting them in college and, moving back to Philadelphia and all those expenses that come with it. And it's like, I only took one season off to really help my wife with our daughters after they were born. And I was still working out for some teams. I worked out for the Panthers. I worked out for the Eagles. Didn't work out. And I went to work in the insurance industry because what little money I was able to save by being a player and having a little bit of a nest egg, I didn't want to have to spend it all. I wanted to supplement my savings. And so, yeah, it's back then, pre Reggie White, pre 2000s, when things just went like just exponential, these salaries, players, think about some of the players around Kansas City, that were work-a-day players, right? I look at friends of mine, Keith Cash in the banking industry, Dana Hughes was in the banking industry, does broadcasting now.
Yeah.
You know, people, you know, have to, they got to go to work because whatever they were able to save, they don't want to just spend it because you're behind the eight ball too, Farzin. I mean, you know, I've often told people that, you know, I feel like sometimes the NFL, playing in the NFL for, let's call it 6 years between, you know, trying to get back in the league, having that cup of coffee with the Rams, my 5 years with the Chiefs, like, you know, I think it actually put me behind the eight ball a little bit because when I quote retired, right, from football,
Yeah.
which I have a funny story about retiring, and what my dad told me when I retired. Um, you know, it was like you go out of the game and then all of a sudden you're thinking, all right, what's the rest of my life, you know, going to look like? And your quote, you know, like I said, you're air quoting there, retiring. You got 40 years of your life to live, right? And you can't afford to just, you know, put whatever money you had. So, you know, you got to get to work. And I think a lot of people, sometimes they don't realize that for, we'll call it the middle to lower end players who don't get a chance to play very long.
I did want to ask you about one of the more heartbreaking moments. And look, there have been a lot of those in Chiefs history in terms of some just stunning losses. And you and I chatted about this a little bit before on the phone. But it was the game in 1996, I believe, January of 1996, when you guys played the Colts.
Oh,
And look, I think everyone knows the story.
yeah.
You guys lost that game 10-7, and there was just so much hype that year. I mean, I'm actually looking at the stat sheet right now, looking at the offensive and defensive starters. I mean, you've just got talent all around on both sides. So I'm sure there was a lot of hype that year, and just everybody thought this was going to be the year for the Chiefs. I mean, especially defensively that year in the 90s. It was just an insane year for Kansas City. But look, everyone knows the story about Lin Elliott. He attempts the 3 field goals, misses all of them. I know in the AFC Championship game against the Patriots, when D Ford was offsides, and look, I get that in the moment, you should, it's always the most crucial moment in a game. People always point the finger at that player or that moment. And I remember Travis Kelce, even during the parade, he would say, oh, we had 55 and he wasn't offsides. Like, even players have made references to certain crucial moments that cost the team a game. You know, look, I've always been a believer, you know, the refs never lose you a game. It's never one player or one turnover. There are so many factors that play, like that AFC Championship game, for example. You know, if you score in the first half of that game, maybe the whole D Ford situation isn't as big of a factor as it ended up being. But a lot of Chiefs fans, they look at that game, it's referred to as a Lin Elliott game. As a player who was there, who was on the field, can you give us the reaction? Because so many fans point the blame on Lin Elliott. Now, you guys are a brotherhood. You guys are teammates. Yeah, you guys don't necessarily do that kind of thing, but were there players that just really felt awful about that, or maybe did they just held it against Lin Elliott? Take me through what it was at the end of the game and in the locker room after that game.
Well, where I'll start with it, Farzin, is number one. I think it was up until that point. I think it was the closest mentally we had ever been to the Super Bowl. Obviously, short of playing in the Super Bowl, you know, in the Len Dawson era. But up until that point, it was probably the closest mentally we were to the Super Bowl, even though physically we were closer to the Super Bowl in '93 when we went to the AFC Championship game, right? That was a different run. You know, that was a magical run, you know, beating Pittsburgh in overtime, going down to the House of Pain, right? And beating the Oilers, you know, on their turf after they won 11 straight. Like, we almost, like, when we got to Buffalo, it was like, okay, when we lost that game, it was heartbreaking because we were this close to getting the Super Bowl physically. But like, we came off that emotional high and we're like, all right, hey, that was a great run. That season, the way that we dominated so much on defense and the way that our offense put up some great numbers, we were clicking on all cylinders in the run game. Steve Bono was, having a fantastic, he was just having a fantastic season. We had that crazy game in Phoenix when we had that 76-yard run where I escorted him down the field, and then I ended up scoring again in that game. It was like we just had all this great stuff going on, and then to get that close, mentally, to have home field throughout, to be 13-3,
Yeah.
and to for so much hype for people, because the Super Bowl that year was in Phoenix, and to beat Phoenix in Phoenix the way that we beat them in that game, not that Phoenix, we were thinking we were going to play them, but to be on that field in Tempe and to think, oh, this is smell it here, guys, because this is what it's going to be like. We're going to be back here in January, February, playing the Super Bowl. It's just that season just had so much to it. And I think that's what took the emotion into the way that a lot of the people who were around the team felt about what Lin Elliott was unable to do in that game by converting those field goals. But as a player, you're all you've got, right, in the locker room. And it's there's a million cliches, whether it be the biblical cliche of, let he who has not sinned cast the first stone, let he who has never had a penalty that's cost a team a game be the one to cast the first stone. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, right? We all make mistakes. And I think that's the one thing that players understand. And that's why, you brought up the great point on the D Ford thing. Players just look, it happens, man. It's it happens to all of us. And, there's no reason why it should have even come down to Lin Elliott missing 3 field goals. That game, we should have dominated that Colts team. We should have pounded them. We were averaging 5 yards a carry in the first half, and it was freezing. It was ice cold game, and we abandoned the run in the second half, and we started throwing the ball. And Steve was, it's his first big playoff start, right? It just was a comedy of errors, that go into something like that. But as a player, you look at a guy like Lin Elliott, and we still go back and forth to this day. Long snappers and their kickers and their holders and punters, we have a bond, and I still have that bond with.
You were a long snapper?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
And so, I think back to my time that I spent with Lin and Louis Aguiar and Brian Barker and all the Nick Lowry and everybody that was, part of that whole long, snapper, kicker, punter, trio. I still talk to Lin, and we still communicate, and I he's a great guy. He's a fantastic guy. He's an unbelievable human being, and it shouldn't have come down to that. And so I would defend a teammate I take it to the hill, because I think that's what players do in the locker room. They take care of each other, because you're all you got. But I do understand why fans and why the city would be emotional about that, because we were so darn close.
Yeah.
So darn close to getting to the Super Bowl that year.
How was Lin Elliott in the locker room after that game?
He was a mess. He was a mess. He was an absolute mess. He put the whole weight of the entire Chiefs organization and the city on his back. And I really felt for him for that, because I think it really did affect him. It was just, it was it for him. That was it. And I think he understood why his tenure was over and why he probably wasn't going to play, in the NFL any further after that. And that's what happens to all of us. We end up, somebody bigger, faster, stronger comes along, and it ends. And so, but I felt really bad for him for that, because he had the entire weight of the city on his shoulders, and he was dejected, and he felt it, and it was palpable. It was palpable how hard that hit him.
Oh, by the way, real quickly before I forget, big shout out to the Real Kansas City Chiefs fans page. They've been sharing all of our Chiefs content lately, so big thanks to them for sharing this as well. Yeah, look, I know you and I have talked about this before, and I know you said you're glad Facebook and Twitter didn't exist back when you played. Because
Oh,
listen, man, I mean, you have some shitheads out there who will tweet a college kicker, "Oh, go eat bleach," or I'm gonna find your family and all these kinds of things. Uh, and look, I know a lot of people listening are going to say, well, Chiefs fans would never say that. Well, there are a few of those out there. I mean, every fan base, okay? Because you just never know. I mean, some people really do take it personally. And listen, look, here are my teams, okay? I'm a Chiefs fan. I'm a Royals fan. I'm a KU football fan, okay? Like my teams have like the Vegas Golden Knights are playing soon. Okay, my teams have either choked it or have been terrible or have blown big leads. Like I've just learned to kind of laugh about it because listen, it is sports. It's not your daily life. Like this isn't life or death. Okay, and I get sure. I don't get me wrong. I curse and shout at the TV just like any other
sure.
sports fans, but. I think some people just do take it because here's one thing, and I think the last couple of weeks I've had a different perspective because Eric Warfield and Jason Dunn, both have played in the Carl Peterson era.
Oh, sure.
They've been on my podcast lately, and we had some honest conversations. Eric was open and honest about his DUIs that he had here in Kansas City. And he mentioned someone just sent a shitty comment to him once when he was doing his podcast that he does, the Chief Concerns podcast with Marcus Dash, a good friend of mine. And he mentioned that, look, words hurt, things that people want to say or people want to bring up his past and whatnot. And I understand that. I'm not debunking that at all. Here's the thing: at the end of the day, no one's ever going to say that kind of thing to your face. Like everyone has a lot to say, on the phone, on the keyboard, whatever, but they're never going to say it to your face. Which I kind of, and please let me know if I'm part of the problem, because look, I make jokes about Brody Croyle and all these bad players we've had over the years in Kansas City. A lot of sports fans do, but you kind of forget sometimes that these people are human too. They've got kids. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story and I'll let you respond to this. I remember when Charlie Weiss was the head coach of Kansas his first year, his son Charlie Weiss Jr. joined him, and I remember he shared a story when his dad was the head coach at Notre Dame. He would have to go to school every day during that final season and hear kids talk about how they wanted the head coach to be fired. And I kind of thought about that because he and I are the same age just about, and I thought, man, that has to hurt, people talking, because listen, your dad could be an accountant, no one's talking about his job, right? But your dad is the head coach of a big school, and you have to deal with the criticisms on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's got to be. I think it's got to be actually harder on the families than it does, because as your children see you as whether it's you're their mom or you're their dad or you're their uncle or cousin or brother or sister or whatever. That's how they see you, right? That's how your family sees you. They just see, my family saw me as little Joey, South Philly kid, grew up, blah blah blah. Like that's who they see me as. No one ever saw me as an NFL player. I mean, this is not the way they perceive it. And I think we lose a little bit of perspective in that matter when we're thinking about those people out there that are professional athletes or they're on a stage. Now, I think so I think it's harder on the people that are around them than the people. I wouldn't take it, I take everything with a grain of salt. If someone was to say to me, here was Joe was, drafted in seventh round, or second round, he only played 5-6 years, blah, blah, like, okay, well, I did it. And that's what I did. And that would hurt if somebody said that, he should have played longer, or he didn't contribute as much as he did or whatever. But like, I just know that, hey, there's this, with the old Spider-Man saying, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So I understand that. I understand that when you take on a job and a role like that you're going to be in the public eye, because the economics of it are that's what drives the salaries. That's what drives you being on that team, is the fans coming to see the games. It's TV contracts. It's all the things that go with being an athlete. And I get that. But I do think Farzin, I think you're right. I think sometimes we, as fans, will forget sometimes that these are just people. I'm
Yeah.
just a guy who happened to get lucky and had some size, speed, whatever, and was able to catch some scout's eye and get to college and get to the NFL and do it. But I'm just a person. I don't, we're not made of, athletes and entertainers aren't made of anything differently than blood and bones and skin, and so I don't even know where I'm going with this. I'm kind of rambling.
No,
but it
this
is
is great.
but it is really, it's got to be harder on the people around that person, because it's not fair to them to hear somebody, Charlie Weiss, to hear his kids hear about, whether his dad should be fired, or and the way that I always look at it is, it's like anything in life. I've been in management now since I left football, and one thing I always do is I always remember to criticize privately and praise publicly, right? And I always remember that when I'm working with teams and trying to coach people to be better professionally, or whatever they're doing, I always keep in mind that, well, number one, you've got to keep things in perspective, and that it's it's about the behaviors that you want to be critical of, rather than the person.
Yeah.
If when Lin Elliott, use that example again, he misses that field goal. It was the behavior of what happened. It was his leg not hitting the ball at the right angle, and the ball going through those skinny little uprights, right? It was the behavior of what happened. It was the action. It wasn't who Lin Elliott was. Lin Elliott did not want to miss those field goals.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think we forget to separate those two things sometimes, and we do it sometimes, when we're scolding kids, or for doing something bad or wrong, and we forget that you got to criticize the behavior, not the person. It didn't make Lin Elliott a bad person that he missed those field goals. They were bad behaviors, and they were bad actions that came out of whatever happened there. But and that's what I think sometimes we lose sight of, because remember, it's only gotten worse, right? With social media, you're a person on the screen. And it was so funny when I would see people in the community, and when I was in Kansas City, and you're right, how differently they would act when they saw you, and than when you were just a helmet and a number out on the field, right?
Yeah.
And my wife Jen used to hear it all the time in the stands, and Louis Aguiar, was a great friend, and my wife really befriended his family, and so, Mr. and Mrs. Aguiar, would be sitting there, and Louis, shank a punt or whatever, and it was like, Aguiar, you stink, you're the worst, and it's like, here's his mom and dad,
Good
right?
Lord.
Here's a guy that's made it to the pinnacle of his profession, and people in the stands knowing full well that's where the family section was, right? Used to be on basically the 30-40 yard line, right behind the bench. I mean, that's where the family's under the overhang at Arrowhead. And like, they're just yelling out things about the players, and it's like, my God, like, these are, what are you doing? Like, Louis is a great guy. He's got great parents. They used to feed us all the time. They make this fantastic, Mexican meals for us, like home cooked meals, and like, they were like the sweetest people you'd ever meet in your life. And they were so good to my wife. She was young, we were young, and they would sit together and talk at the games, and when our families would out, we'd introduce. But it's just like, I just remember her coming home and being so wrought with like emotion about how hard that was for her to get used to hearing people talk about players. You stink, you're the worst, replace this player, do that, whatever. Yeah. And that's why I go back to that comment. I think it's harder on the people who were outside the circle than it is even the player, because when someone would tell me I stunk, I'm like, oh, whatever, I'm out here doing it, and you're not,
you're
or
living
whatever.
the dream. They'll
You know,
talk shit about you, but they would gladly trade places with you. No question about it.
of course, and they would, and they would all, and I'm sure people would always say that, fans would always say that, like I would, I would take, for that kind of money, I'd take that kind of criticism. That's fine, okay, well, I was always okay with it, and I think a lot of players were always okay with it.
You know what's
But it
funny?
was like I said,
No, I don't mean to cut you off. Here's the thing. It's
yeah,
like everyone wants, the glory and the social media followers. It's funny because, we're talking about families. Brittany Matthews, I mean, she gets lit up. And look, when she does all these selfies, in the middle of a game, like when a touchdown happens, okay, are they goofy? Yeah. Would it be annoying if Tom Brady's wife did that? Of course. But she's not killing anybody. She's not harming anybody. She's not doing
right.
anything wrong. She's just supporting her man. I mean, that's what wives, girlfriends do, but she gets killed sometimes for this stuff. And I remember someone sent a tweet saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if Patrick was single and he could do, so many things with different women? And she responded to that tweet, and that guy got lit up on Twitter to the point where I think he actually he didn't block he locked his account where it's private and you can't read his tweets. So you have to be following that person in order to see it. So everyone has something to say. And then when the athlete or the family member responds, and look, there was an incident with this clown. I'll refrain from saying his name. He and I used to podcast on the same site. Just some guy who thought he knew it all. He attacks Tom Brady's child, his 5-year-old at the time, 5-year-old daughter. And I think people started talking about how Tom Brady was pissed. Like he actually hung up on the station after like a certain a length of time passed for his weekly radio segment. He was like, okay, I've reached my time. I'm getting paid for this. I'm going to hang up on you guys now. Because he let it be known he was upset that someone on that same station made a comment about his daughter, and the discussion did come up. Look, athletes don't like the criticism, but they understand it. But when you make it personal or even involve their family members that way, like what the hell,
Yeah, no, it's out of bounds. It's off
Yeah.
limits. And it should be. Call me whatever you want. I understand the risk and I understand the reward of being in a position like that. And I think some people just feel like because players are ultimately funded, right? Air quotes again. If they're funded by the fans, right? I mean, if fans stop going to games, if fans stop watching television, there weren't advertising dollars. You see it with other sports, right? Where if it's not the fans and the funding and the popularity, the other sports don't make it to the NFL level. And I think fans to a certain degree feel like they have more because they feel like the players are getting something from them, that they have the right or the privilege of being able to be critical of it. And
I
I
pay for
get
your
that.
house is what a lot of fans say.
I get that. But like you said, when it becomes personal and there's a line, and there's a line that people cross where it goes from being a critical fan to being, like I'm just as guilty of it. I'm a huge Sixers fan, right? Philadelphia kid, watched them my whole life. Dr. J, World Be Free, going all the way back to the Darryl Dawkins days. I mean, always been a huge Sixers fan. And Joel Embiid did not have a good game the other night, right? I mean, it was terrible. He was 0 for 12 in the second half, and it's like, in my mind, I'm going, Joe, come on, like, dude, like one basket, like, and then the athlete in me goes, well, I was the guy that snapped one over the goalposts with the Rams. You know what I mean? Like, who am I? There goes that stone again, right? And so. I think you get caught up in that perspective because you get so emotionally tied into sports. We get so emotionally tied into it. I saw it. I coached youth sports. I coached high school football for 11 years, and I saw so many families and parents and family friends just get so tied up in that moment. And it's like, guys, this is not, this isn't world peace. We're not curing cancer. We're not doing surgeries on operating room tables. Like, this is high school sports. This is youth sports. I was coaching 5th grade basketball, and I remember a brouhaha, that a coach, had. It was like, oh my God, One guy went after a referee, a 16-year-old referee, followed her out, a male, 45-year-old male to a 16-year-old female,
Jesus.
and followed her out into a parking lot, and was like, berating her because of some calls that she did or didn't make in this 5th grade basketball league.
Yeah.
So I've took it upon myself to knock on his door, and I don't recommend anybody doing this. I'm not saying I don't condone this kind of behavior. It's just the emotion took over me because it was a family friend, and I just knocked on the door and I said, listen, I'm just going to tell you one thing. And I didn't threaten. I didn't say I'm going to do. I just said basically, I left a lot of a lot of unspoken words, and I said, you're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
And that's all I said. I didn't threaten. I didn't just wanted to get my point across that this isn't that important. And if you want to enjoy your plastic 5th grade basketball trophy at the end of the year, by all means enjoy it. But I just said, you're not going to do that ever again.
It's just so weird. Like, some people take the whole thing so personally too. Like, I my family and I, we know of another family. They actually took their kids off of a baseball team because the coach, who also has a kid on the team, would just berate these kids over a sport. Like, I mean, it's little league baseball. Like, chill out. I did want to share a funny story, kind of going back to the whole family thing. There was a UFC fighter named Chris Gutierrez. He's not like a famous fighter. He's not very well known, but I did watch him in a promotion called World Series of Fighting. It's now, they've rebranded it, and it's now called the Professionals Fighters League, excuse me. But when he was fighting at the World Series of Fighting, I remember in front of me, there was a family of 4, and they all like pulled out their phone and they're all recording his entrance. And I'm thinking, okay, this definitely is the family. Like, it has to be. And obviously they're more passionate about the match than we are. Neither of these guys are from Kansas City, so I don't have any emotional attachment to either one of these fighters. Whereas all of a sudden you hear this person's mom, the sister, and I think even the girlfriend, they're all shouting. And there were a group of people, to my right, a few rows down. They're like, oh yeah, go Chris's mom. Yeah, yell louder. And you're just hearing these comments. It's like, I'm thinking to myself, there might be another fight in the stands if these comments continue. But it's like, I even like looked at that moment right there. I'm like, listen, I've been to some regional MMA events where I'm sitting in front of or behind the family members. And I remember there was one fighter, he went for a cheap shot. In boxing or in UFC, at the beginning of the round, they'll touch gloves real quickly. Yeah, one fighter actually touched the glove and immediately went for a spinning back kick, which, look, I think that is just completely cheap. But I didn't say anything because that guy's family was sitting right in front of me. So, it's just, moments like that kind of do make me realize, okay, look, these people, their families, they take it to heart too. You still have the right to boo and cheer. I think you should, but be a little careful with what you say because you never know who you're sitting next to.
Right. Exactly. It's just like everything in life. You just want to act as if your mom is, standing next to you,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And listen, I get carried away, especially in hockey games. I mean, the Golden Knights are playing right now, and I remember we were sitting second row, and there was a fight right in front of us, and we're just shouting, and there were some people to our left throwing middle fingers, all that great stuff, because hockey fights are great. They really are.
Yeah.
By the way, are you a hockey fan at all?
I am a huge hockey fan. Yeah, I love my Flyers. I love hockey. You grew up in Philly with the Broad Street Bullies. I mean, there were some great teams. And we were, we used to. I mean, love going. Good friends with Brian Propp, Gaffaw.
Yeah.
So we're buds. And
see, I'm still learning about this sport, and honestly, man, I'm surprised this is not a very popular sport in the US. I get it competes with the NBA because they start and finish just about the same time. But and here's the thing with me, like, Kansas City doesn't have a pro hockey team. Well, they do, but they're not an NHL team.
Sure.
I've always heard it's easier to like a sport if you have a team to follow. And because I go to Vegas several times a year when there isn't a pandemic. And so when Vegas got a team, I said, okay, I'm gonna get behind this team. And they've become one of the best teams in hockey. They're in the Final Four right now, but it becomes easier to follow when you have a team to follow. And during my time just starting to follow hockey, I'm thinking, why is this not a popular sport in the US? I think it's such a fun sport. It's so physical. It's kind of like football and soccer. Obviously, the what's the word I'm looking for? The premise is similar to soccer, get the puck in the
Yeah.
back of the net. But it's also a lot like football or boxing or MMA, where there is a lot of physical contact, and people love that in the US at least. I'm surprised it's not a popular sport here.
I think part of it, Farzin, is I think hockey is it's not, well, number one, it's not culturally ingrained in us, right? The same way
Yeah.
the same way that soccer is not, right? It's soccer, I think, is getting there because soccer is going to get more traction than hockey, I think, in the super long run, because anybody can play soccer. You grab a ball, you put a penny on, you could make a net out of two broomsticks, right? A goal. Hockey's tough. Hockey's tough sport. It's ice time. You got to get ice time. You got to get a lot. It's a lot of equipment. It's pretty
Yeah.
expensive. There's a lot of travel. It's off hours because of the ice time thing and the limited resources of the rinks. I mean, I think football is a little bit more culturally ingrained. And even though there are some equipment, maybe there's some barriers to entry from an equipment perspective, because you got to have the helmets and the pads and everything, people just get behind the whole thing of the war of football, right? The football represents war. Two armies on a front, aerial raids, ground attack. Like, it just has everything that I think Americans look for, in a sport. Basketball is similar in that, basketball you can play anywhere, right? I mean, you get a hoop. I mean, I've seen, milk crates nailed to a garage as a basketball hoop, right? So I think there's just something about hockey and the confluence of things that don't allow it to become part of our mainstream. And I think part of it's not US born and bred, right? It's not American born and bred. I think people still they look at hockey and they think of it as a Canadian, European type sport, right? Where basketball, baseball, and football, right, are American sports, right? They're American born and bred. And I think there's something to that about those three sports that hockey doesn't have. It's still seen as a and I don't mean any offense by this word, but it's still seen as a foreign sport to the US, right? And it's not something that is culturally ingrained here. And then you throw all the things that you put in the barriers to entry, and then people just throw their hands up and go, there's not enough goals, there's not enough scoring.
Yeah.
And while it might be physical and at any particular moment a fight might break out, you think Americans would be all over hockey, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they have, don't get me wrong, I think hockey's popular, but not like it is in other parts of the world, or the way that football is and that basketball and baseball are. It's just, there's just something about, I think, that cultural part of it that holds it back from being like fully mainstreamed here in the US.
Well, you mentioned fights, and I remember game one of the last series that the Golden Knights were against the Colorado Avalanche. They were getting their ass kicked 7-1, but it was so entertaining because there was some drama in that game, a lot of fights back and forth. Like, I watched it all the way down, whereas most people usually, if you're losing by 6 scores in football, I mean, you're turning off the TV. You're doing something else. You're probably drinking your sorrows by that time. Whereas,
right,
with this, it's like, it's so, even a scoreless game is so interesting because a lot is still happening. So, look, I really wish people would give this sport an opportunity if you don't watch it, but that's just me. I did want to ask you about another sport, boxing, because your father was a pro boxer. What was that like? Growing up as a kid watching your dad, because I've heard when a pro fighter, whether it's boxing or UFC, MMA, whatever, I heard it's a lot harder to watch when you're watching your loved one get hit in the face. And there was someone who I did know of, and I watched one of his fights, and it was kind of hard to watch him get hit. What was that like, having a
Yeah,
dad as a boxer?
I mean, number one, it was great because he taught me the sport, and I boxed amateur from the time I was 9 until I was 14, and I
That's
loved it.
awesome.
I loved every minute of it. I think it helped me so much with my hand-eye coordination. It taught me how to take a hit. It taught me to be tough. And then obviously, I mean, I'll turn profile. You look at my nose. Once this thing started getting to the point where it was, my dad was like, "Son, you're either gonna have to like get that thing broken, or we're gonna have to get some cartilage taken out of that thing because, you know, you're gonna you need a helmet with that nose." But like that was my dad. My dad had a great sense of humor, and he had a great way of busting you. And so I stopped boxing, and I started focusing on football, football and baseball mostly. And then I wrestled, I played basketball, I did winter track, I did all other sports, and I got away from the boxing thing when I was about 14. But unfortunately, I never got to see my dad box. My dad was pretty old when he had me. He was in his 40s.
Okay.
So he was long retired by then. And back then when you were a professional boxer, in the Philadelphia circuit, I mean, you worked. I mean, my dad was a truck driver and he was a warehouseman. So he didn't make a living boxing.
Unless you're like even UFC fighters, like unless you're Conor McGregor, who just got like a $600 million deal on his whiskey, like everyone, a lot of fighters work.
Yeah. So my dad, but he loved it, and all of his friends were boxers. I mean, my dad trained with Joe Giardello, who was the middleweight champion of the world, and they fought out of the same gym, Olympia Gym in Philadelphia and South Philly, and I just loved being around that culture. We would go to see the fights in Philadelphia to Blue Horizon, and he would take us. It was our little boys' day out, and he got me into horse racing. I love going to the track with my pop, and they were great ways to spend time together. And it was it was a sport. My brother boxed. He was amateur. My uncle, my dad's brother, was amateur. He did all the Golden Glove circuit and everything in Philadelphia. And funny story, my grandmother didn't want my uncle Anthony to box, so he fought under my dad's name a lot, which was interesting. That she didn't mind that my dad boxed, but she did mind that my uncle did. So I don't know, there was some favoritism there or something. My dad used to joke about. But he just taught me toughness. He taught me how to be tough, and like typical example of the street smarts of my dad. When I retired from football, as mentioned earlier, I will tell you a funny retirement story. My dad was like, my dad loved sports. Like he just loved watching. He loved watching us play as kids. He just relished it. And he wasn't a big football, he didn't know a lot about the game, but he loved the game. And I'll never forget, when I retired, and I called my dad, which I called him on everything that happened in my life. He was my hero. He was like, "Well, son, I'm super proud of you. And you did something that you wanted to do and you set out to do, and now you got to move on to the next part of your life." And he goes, "I want you to remember one thing." And I thought, Farzin, he was going to tell me like, "You're the greatest ever. Like, I love, you're so proud of you." This is what my dad goes. He goes, "Joey," he goes, "you just got to remember one thing as you move on to the next phase of your life. You're nobody now." And I was like, oh, it was like an uppercut from my pop right in the gut, right? I'm like, "Dad, like what the?" And he's like, "No, son." He goes, I just want, he's like, "Pop, I just, because he called me Pop." He's like, "Pop," he's like, "I just wanted to say that because whatever you do in the next phase of your life," he goes, "you got to bring value, son. You got to bring value to whatever you do in the next phase of your life.
Yeah.
Football's not going to carry you." And he goes, "That's why."
Yeah.
He goes, and I'm telling you, I hear, we lost my dad, many years ago, and I still hear that echo in my head, like, "You're nobody." And it's not because he meant it because I wasn't nobody. It wasn't an attack, a personal attack on me as a human being. It was an attack on what society can do to you when you get to a certain position. And all of a sudden I thought, I'm going to walk into the insurance industry and I'm going to just, everybody's going to want to do business with me because I played football with Joe Montana. And Joe Montana stuck his hands up my butt, right? Like, nobody cared. And my dad used to say it all the time. And you probably heard it in the movie Bronx Tale. And my dad was very much like Lorenzo the bus driver, and he looked exactly like Robert De Niro. My dad is a spitting image of Robert De Niro. And like he would say things like, "Son, Joey, nobody cares, Pop. Nobody cares." Like, because it wasn't like he was being pessimistic. He was just giving me the realities of the world, in that you have to find yourself. You got to find your own way, and you've got to please yourself. And that's why, like, when we were talking about all that stuff about fans and stuff, I'm like, you know what? That's noise, because I know what I was able to do.
Yeah.
And that piece of advice my dad gave me as an old school tough South Philly boxing dude was, when he said, "You're nobody now," it is literally the best piece of advice I ever got as an ex-NFL player, because it was his courage and willingness to tell me that I was going to have to bring value for the rest of my life, and do not sit on your laurels. Do not rest on the fact that, big deal. Big deal. You caught a touchdown from Joe Montana. Big deal. There's a lot more problems that are going on out there in the world that you need to help solve. And there's things, purpose you need to bring. You need to be the best father you can be, the best coach you can be, the best teammate, the best husband, whatever it was. I needed to be the best at all those other things, and not just make it all about me. Oh, I played in the NFL, so, bow down, right? Like, who cares? My dad was like, who cares? And that's like when I was telling you that story when he met Joe Montana. Like, he goes up to Joe Montana in the locker room. He goes, "Hey, Joe," he goes, "nice to meet you." And, Joe's like, "Hey, Mr. V, nice to meet you." And he's like, "I got to tell you something, Joe." He goes, "You're a good Italian kid." He goes, "I get it." And I'm channeling my dad now, right? You can hear the accent starting to come out, right? The South Philly, he's starting to come out. He's like, "Look," he's like, "Joe, I get it. You're like the best." He goes, "But I got to tell you something." He goes, "This isn't my favorite sports moment meeting you." So Joe's like, he's reeling Joe in, right, with his South Philly like storytelling capabilities. And Joe's like, "All right," Joe wants to play along now. He's like, "All right, well, Mr. V, you got to tell me then, what is the best sport, memory you have?" He goes, "Oh, Joe, let me tell you. Jersey Joe Walcott's coming to Philly to fight Rocky Marciano. And who comes to train at our gym but the Rock himself?" And he's like, "Rocky Marciano. Then his team asks me to spar with him because they said, 'Hey, this Valerio kid, he fights a lot like Jersey Joe Walcott. So let's get him in the ring with Marciano so that he can, so he can show him, they can work on their sparring, training for the fight.'" So it was like my dad. So he goes, "That, Joe, is my proudest moment." And like Joe Montana's like, "Hey, Mr. V, let me tell you something." He goes, "If that were me, that would be my proudest moment, because meeting a schlub like me," he goes, "that's nothing compared to sparring with Rocky Marciano." So Joe's giving it back and forth to my dad. And then like at the end of the conversation, they like shared a big hug. And like, that was the kind of guy my dad was. He could make anybody feel comfortable. And when he saw Joe Montana, the greatest quarterback ever, I'm still saying it to this day, I love you, Tom Brady, but Joe Montana is still the greatest quarterback ever. It was like, he was so what? He was Joe Montana. So what? He plays football. So what? Like, and it wasn't because he didn't have a respect for what Joe did or he wasn't a fan. He just had this greater picture, this greater view that like, so what? He's a kid from Pittsburgh. Big deal. So he has 4 Super Bowl rings. Big deal. Like, it just, that kind of grounding is what I think everybody needs in their life.
Yeah.
And so, Farzin, to this day, I still hear it all the time. "You're nobody now." And not because I kick myself and I say I am nobody. It's not that. It's more about bring value. And I think, it was the best lesson I ever had.
I'm sure you followed the sport of boxing, over the years. I've got to ask you your opinion, because today boxing is so crazy. And look, I'm guilty of it because it does grab my attention, because I don't watch boxing a whole lot. I can give you a few names today, but I can't tell you, much about the sport. But I will admit, following these YouTubers, Jake Paul and Logan Paul, and just recently Logan and Mayweather had a match. I know Jake Paul is going to fight. He just knocked out Ben Askren, who was a former wrestler at Mizzou. He's going to fight another Mizzou wrestler. In fact, Askren's teammate, Tyron Woodley, who I'm a fan of. So I'm actually very interested in seeing that. What are your thoughts on seeing these YouTube stars pretty much take over boxing in such a big way?
It's taken a little bit of it away from the sport for me. I'm an old school purist.
Yeah.
You know, I think for me, just to be honest, Farzin, not no offense to any boxing fans out there, I love the sport. If I had a son, or daughters too, my daughters could have boxed if they wanted to, but I would encourage it. I think it's just at a certain level, because I think there's some things, you can get to a certain level where it does become maybe a little bit more dangerous, and you might not want to see, like you said earlier, a loved one get hit in the head. But I never would have said to a child of mine or anybody in my family, don't do it. Like, if you want to try it. Like, just be safe, do it safely. For me, boxing, just to me personally, and again, no offense to anybody who loves it and follows it to this day, because I do love the sport itself. I lost it with the end of the heavyweight era, is where I kind of how you like it, a lot of things in life, you kind of like a lot of times, with people my age, their fashion sense, right? Like I jumped off the track in the 90s, and that's about where my fashion sense ended. Like I'm still on that platform, because you just some things in your life, the music you listen to, right? Everything now after 80s or 90s rock to me is noise, right? Because that's I'm old. But like the heavyweight era of Holmes, Ali, Norton, Frazier, Spinks, like to a certain degree, with even some of the Sugar Ray Leonards and the Thomas Hearns, the Roberto Durans, like once it got past when those guys prime, I just kind of like stopped with the sport. Like I just, for some reason, there was something about it. I don't know whether it was subconscious or what. It just fell off the track for me. I don't know why. I don't know whether it was because to me, that was like the romantic era of heavyweight boxing, when you had it's just Howard Cosell and the Boyce and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And it just, it's funny because my wife and I we've dated since high school, and I'll never forget when I brought my wife home to meet my parents. It was hysterical, right? So I'm bringing my wife home, my now wife, she wasn't my wife then, she's my girlfriend. So I bring my girlfriend over to meet my parents, and it's Friday night, and my dad's watching the Friday night fights.
Yeah.
Right? This was 1987. Okay. This would have been, February, like late February, 1987. And I bring my girlfriend home, Jen, and I introduce my parents, and what's on? The fights. Friday night fights are on, right? And we were about to go out on a date on a Friday night, and we're just sitting there in the living room, and my parents are like typical Italians, where like the TV was always on. I don't know what that was about my family. Nobody was even watching it, but it was just on.
Yeah.
And the TV's on, the fights are on. My dad's not really watching it. He's having a snack. My mom's doing something. And we're all trying to make conversation. My mom's getting some stuff, little snacks or whatever to bring out to us to entertain us while we're there before we go out on our date. And Jen just thinks she's gonna say something and tell. My wife is a great athlete. She played sports and all that stuff. So she really got sports. So she's trying to connect with my pops. And she goes, "Wow." She goes, I just don't get boxing. She's like, I don't know how two grown men could get in a ring and just beat the daylights out of each other. And my dad starts laughing, right? Like, and that's how great my dad was, right? He starts laughing, and he starts giggling. And he's like, "Oh yeah." And he goes, and he says to her, he says, "I hear you." and so I had to bridge it. Like it got so awkward, because I knew that someday she was going to find out. And I'm like, "Well," I said, "Jen," I said, my dad was
Oh, you didn't tell her?
And she's like, I know, it never came up.
Joe.
We had just started dating. We had just started. We had met during football season, right, of that year. and then we didn't start dating until February. Well, I can remember the date like it was yesterday, right? It was February 12th was our first date. And so like we weren't really dating that long at that point, and it just never really came up, like, and in any of the short conversations we had up until our first date and then some subsequent dates after that. And it's like, and my dad, he handled it like a champ, the champ that he was. He's like, oh, he goes, yeah, I get it. He goes, I hear you. I think it's pretty stupid myself. And I had to tell her at that point. I'm like, well, I said,
that's hilarious.
So we still laugh about that. She tells my daughters that story all the time about, eating her size 8 shoe right there in my parents' apartment. So
that's great. Well, hey, Joe, I mean, we talked about so many things. I really appreciate your honesty about a lot of these topics.
Yeah, sure,
being a backup, I know that's not the easiest thing to open up, especially family talk. I mean, that and I really hope people listening definitely have a different perspective hearing those kinds of stories. But
sure,
hey, look, I really enjoy your podcast with Jeff Fedotin over at the Believe Podcast Networks. Like I said, I've had a couple of guys, Jason Brown coming up soon, and Eddie Law. He's been on the podcast a couple of times. Great guys, and you as well. I really enjoy the podcast. If you guys haven't subscribed to the Believe in Chiefs podcast, it's basically anywhere you can catch any podcast for that matter, just like this podcast. And Joe, what is your social media? How can people follow you?
At Joe Valerio 73 on Twitter, probably the best one, and that's my same handle for Instagram too. But like I said, I'm old. Look at all this gray hair up here, Farzin. I try my best to do as much. But Twitter's probably the best. That's where we publicize the podcast, and I will make some tweets during games and things like that. Exciting times. I do need to do a better job. I know that, but I do. I'm much more active on LinkedIn because I've been in the insurance industry now, for 24 years. So 4 times as long as I played football. So LinkedIn is sort of more my social media because that's where my business contacts are. And
that's what Chad Henne said after that Browns game.
Exactly. So that's where it's been at for me. I'm an adjunct professor. I teach leadership at a local university here in the Philadelphia area. So I stay busy with that, and between the podcast, the teaching, I'm actually working on my MBA at Villanova. So I'm actually an old student. Like I walk into some of my MBA classes, and people think I'm the professor. When I walk in, they all straighten up, and here I am. I sit down with the students. So I've been doing that, and between that work and that keeps me pretty busy. So getting a chance to do this with you is the highlight of my day. So I love chatting with you, Farzin. I love what you do out there on social media and covering the Chiefs and all the things that you're doing. So I'm happy to join you anytime. Just give me a ring, and I would love to join you if anything ever comes up. So
yeah, no, you're always one of the more fun guys to talk to. So I always appreciate everything you've done for me and how gracious you've been with your time. So we'll definitely have to talk during the early portion of football season for sure. Hey, Joe, like I said, always great talking to you. Stay safe, and then we'll definitely keep tuning into the Believe in Chiefs podcast.
Sounds great, buddy. Go Knights.
Go Knights. Yeah, we're down. Knights. We're down 2-0 right now.
I see you peeking up there every once in a while.
We need some.
I gotta go see how the Sixers are doing against the Hawks. I haven't been multitasking, so I gotta go check out how my Sixers are doing.
Appreciate you guys downloading and listening to this episode of the podcast. If you guys enjoyed this episode, share the links. We're everywhere: Facebook, YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, everywhere. So share the links. Other than that, Joe and I have got to go catch our teams. You guys enjoy the rest of your nights. Take care.
Take care, everybody.